Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for today. This is a continuation of my guide series. We're on to Rage. This is the first in the series of tank videos. As normal, you'll find in the comment section a pinned comment. This is going to have annotations to all the different various parts of the video in terms of looking at the rotations, the spec, loadouts for tank, DPS, single target, melee, AoE, supercharged testing. Everything you need to know about Rage will be in that pinned comment with time spams to be able to skip right to that section. So we'll kind of get on to Rage here. Rage has basically been one of the most fun powers in the game since its release. It was basically, Rage has never gone to a point where it's been bad. Rage has always been very good in both PvE and PvP as a tank. Rage has just always been near the top. It was basically, Rage is the only power set in this game that is designed completely for melee based. You won't find too many actual range powers in the entire Rage tree. They're all going to be melee based. Relentless Anger, Severe Punishment, Outrage, Lacerate, Revenge, even Frenzy, Without Mercy. Missing something else here. Probably some others, but like the Violence Dot, same thing. So it's all melee. The only really range powers in the entire power set, you've got Dreadful. E-Chain is technically, the first hold of E-Chain is range, where the second is melee. So technically E-Chain fits there. Phonetic Bombardment, Dreadful Blast, Plasma Wretch, and that's pretty much it in terms of range. Obviously, you've got this Channeled Hate, stuff with powers like that, Rage Blast, but as you can, even Galling Eruption is technically melee, maybe mid-range. It's low mid-range. So it's a power set completely designed for melee. So what I mean by that is, Rage always does very well in Rage where you can melee. If you can't melee, then the damage starts to drop off and you don't see as many Rage DPS. But towards the end of a DLC, or the DLC is easy or regular, you can always melee, then you see a lot of Rage DPS everywhere, and Rage tanking has always been great as well. Most of you probably won't remember when Rage was actually released. It got quite funny because you could clip... Outrage was a lot different back in the day. Outrage actually did more damage if the target was below 50%. Health. So basically you could clip Outrage with Outrage. So you could just keep spamming Outrage when clipping Outrage, and once they got below 50% it did even more damage. Berserk lasted longer and absorbed more damage, and it was still a 50% super. So it got pretty ridiculous. And Bloodlust was the critical buff, so it's Rage was pretty OP back in the day, that's for sure, when it first released. And then PvP, obviously, with this is the first time you've had a healing mechanic for DPS and DPS stance. So it's very handy for PvP fights, especially just with the self-healing mechanic. So we'll kind of get into the specifics here. Okay, so in terms of the Rage loadouts, you pretty much have the exact same spec as normal for any kind of melee power set. So right now we're sitting at 450 skill points. We've got super power spec. Obviously, you're always going to take the critical attack chance and critical damage, and then throwing everything into might, and then the rest into health because you're melee based. Just quite a simple concept there. Everything after you've dumped everything into might, you dump it into health. Iconic powers. You're really only taking Robot Sidekick. You could technically take Neo Venom, depending if you're going to need a range armory. You also see it takes a Freezing Breath too, the range armory. So just depending on how many armories you want to set up, if you want to take more powers, like you're going to need technically Heat Vision, Freezing Breath, and Neo Venom boost as well for Rage. But you don't need it on the AoE armory or the for melee, so you might as well take the extra skill points and put it in health. But depending on how many Rage armories you want to make, then it's up to you. And in terms of once again, the acro tree, I'm just taking Rocket Glide, technically Zip Tie Attack as well, and just the innates. Don't bother taking the recoveries or the breakup mastery. These don't scale at all with your skill points, so they're just completely pointless. The resistant ones are probably pointless too. I'm not sure how much 10% even matters anymore, but it's still 10%. So I've got the extra skill points that you can put into it, but if you don't, then don't really worry about it. And in terms of weapons, once again, I'm just putting one in my weapon. I don't use it. It's just a one-handed. Preferably, you want to one-handed, just a lunge. That's where you're going to want to have it ideally. And in terms of gear, we're sitting at Blasted Upper always for the mod. Head mod, you're always going to have Supercharged Berserk. Neck mod's always going to be Escalating Might. The back mod, I've seen some Rage DPS use Accelerated Berserk here or some other variations. Now, Accelerated Berserk, even if you have a Gemini spamming group, 10% off a 12-second Supercharge, you're not going to be able to consistently use Berserk that quickly anyway, even if you have a complete Gemini spam group. So, obviously, since your melee damage, your health is going to be spiking the entire time. So Berserker obviously, helps out much better than that, because you're going to have times where you do dip below 35%. So an extra damage, especially with melee, is going to help out. Chest mod, Extended Supercharge. Leg mod, Restorative Lacerate. The healing doesn't really matter anyway, so don't worry about it. It's just something you can put in. Ring, Trinket. In terms of Trinket Belt, really, it stays the exact same. Since this is going to be an AoE loadout, you have the Summer Event Trinket. If it's going to be a single target loadout, put the Seahorse in. Or if you don't have the Summer Event Trinket, put the Seahorse in, just depending on what trinkets you have. In terms of artifacts, it's going to be the same 3 for Rage. You're going to have Eye of the Gemini, Scrap of the Soul Cloak, and Soul Amplifier. You could technically put Tetrahedron instead of Soul Amplifier. Like, you could technically, your base might is going to drop, but in the end, it'll make it up from the buff. So that's completely up to you. You're still buffing the entire group with this. So once again, it's still a preference if you don't want to buff the group and have that. So basically, I've said it before in other videos. My thought process is, if I run the Tetra and another my DPS doesn't, then that DPS technically gets to take advantage of 4 artifacts, and I only get to take advantage of 3. So yes, that's a selfish, not even scoreboard mentality. It's just, if I want to do the most damage I can, then I don't run the Tetra because it helps everyone else. So it just depends what your preference is. If you want to help the group and run a Tetra, then go ahead and take out the Soul Amplifier because you need the Soul Cloak and the Eye of the Gemini. So just sub and use those 3. So it's completely up to you, whatever your personal preference is. But Dead King's not worth it, and neither is any other DPS artifact. And in terms of feat, Tumbling Mastery, and nothing really changes. Max damage, obviously. So the way that puts me here in terms of stats, similar to my selection video, I'm sitting at 39,067 might, 84,991 health, because I am running the 3 generator health mods now, because I'm obviously a tank. Normally I'd run 3 powers, but as a tank class, you should have the 3 health generator mods, so that's going to help your health, as well as you need health for rage anyway. But yeah, 84,991 health. My power took a dip, obviously, because I'm not running those generator mods anymore. And that's the might. And Prec is 11,439. Okay, so in terms of the first loadout, this is going to be your typical go-to melee loadout. Relentless Anger, Severe Punishment, Outrage, Lacerate, Robot Sidekick, and Berserk. Technically, you'll see with Rage, there are some variations. You see a lot of people using like Dreadful and AoE. You see a lot of people using E-Chain. My preference here, the goal of Rage is to earn Berserk as fast as you can, because Berserk is pretty much the most powerful supercharge in the game. Technically, it's not. Really, it falls to Entomb or some of the hundreds like Call of Deep. But if you're using Rage correctly, and you don't get interrupted, like, best case scenario, you don't get interrupted by an ad, you don't have to block. Berserk is very strong for Rage because it's melee aspect, and basically it's damage increase and causing damage additionally to be dealt. So you want to earn Berserk as quickly as possible, especially since its cooldown is so low, so you can continually keep using it. Because the advantage of Berserk over any other 50% supercharges like Entomb's Earth or any other strong 50s is that Berserk has a 12-second cooldown, all those have 30. So you can use twice as many Berserks as any other DPS can use their 50. So that's why I have Relentless Anger. Severe Punishment obviously just starts my Enraged mechanic, as well as it sets up a melee dot. Outrage is Outrage. That's most common. Same thing with Lacerate. Lacerate is very good for melee, as well as helps build my Supercharge. So some people may want to not run Robot Sidekick, or you have power issues and can't run it, then you could always put like Dreadful in. But the reason why I don't run Dreadful is that A, you can be interrupted. B, it's a bit slower too, and in the way you'll see this rotation is that it's flawless in terms of its timing, where Dreadful, you just don't need it. The only advantage of Dreadful is that, say you're meleeing and the next set of ads are a bit farther away and you can't lunge in time, you could technically do Dreadful and then lunge into it without Rage. So you're doing a little bit more damage, but as long as you position yourself, you don't need it. And the other thing as well, E-Chain. While E-Chain is good on when the targets are below 35% health, the second hold of E-Chain is blockable. So even if one ad blocks an entire group, when you do E-Chain, you're getting it knocked down and counters. So then there's a damage loss because you got to get back up and start DPSing again. So there are situations where E-Chain can be handy, but in terms of the consistent damage of Robot Sidekick throughout an entire raid, it's going to be more beneficial to you than just the second hold of E-Chain sometimes when the ads hit. Plus, once again, you'll see with my timing with my rotation is that using any other power is just going to slow down the timing and slow down the rotation. So you might as well have Robot Sidekick to help you with that just consistent damage. But some people won't be able to afford the power because it is obviously Rage is always very power heavy. So as you can see from the parsers, 40, 38, basically 39, 45. The 39 basically parser was a 17.6% crit, so obviously that certainly helped out towards that being lower. But the point of this rotation is not to have the highest parsing damage. That you could put in Galling Eruption and clip that with severe punishment for a higher parse. But this rotation is specifically designed to earn Berserk or earn Supercharged as fast as you possibly can. So I'm hitting Relentless Anger, as you can see, every 6 seconds. It uses massive power this rotation, but that's just Rage in general. So Relentless Anger is being used every 6 seconds. I'm clipping off Lacerate into Outrage as soon as Outrage becomes available to increase the timing. So Lacerate is helping my Supercharged regen. Same with Outrage. The Severe Punishment dot is the Supercharged generator. So you can't earn Berserk faster using any other rotation besides this one, and that's where the focus is on Rage. So basically, a Rage already does well on parsers, and Rage's Berserk helps balance out everything else. So the more often you're using Berserks, the more often you're doing great damage, either range, AoE. Single target, doesn't matter. Berserk basically balances out everything, especially in a meta where it's going to be Eye of the Gemini, where you'll see in a follow-up video the type of effect that multiple group members spamming Eye of the Gemini will have on your regen. So basically, you want to focus on earning as much Supercharge as possible. Now, there's rotations that you might see rotations with like E-Chain is melee or Dreadful Blast, but once again, Dreadful Blast is a little bit slower. E-Chain, I don't like the second hold is going to be blockable, so you lose damage being counterable just in case. So just the extra damage you would get by sneaking out a Dreadful or an E-Chain, screwing up your rotation timings. Because as you can see, this rotation follows exact timings each time. Like there's no break between any of the powers. There's no downtime. So the damage you may squeak out using a second hold of E-Chain or a Dreadful Blast from range or anything like that pales in comparison to the type of damage you would get by consistently having Berserks as fast as possible. So that's using the Berserk 3, the sending Supercharge in the chest, and the Supercharge generator in this type of rotation, using it every 6 seconds. Okay, so in terms of Rage's range loadout, like I said before, since Rage is pretty much like a melee-centric DPS set, the damage potential really drops off when you go range. That's where you see a lot of Rage DPS struggle, and that's why we kind of pick up a power called Freezing Breath. You'll see why when I show you the rotation in a moment. But essentially the loadout is Plasma Retch, Dreadful Blast, Freezing Breath, Frenetic Bombardment, Robot Psychic, and Berserk. So with that, you got a couple of things here. You could technically use Galling Eruption, but in terms of Galling Eruption's range, it gets a little bit tricky. So basically, if I'm standing right here at 3 squares away, which is still mid-range, but it still feels close. Like if I use Galling Eruption, doesn't hit the targets at all. So you got no PI setup, you got no dot damage, and I'm only standing 3 squares away. So that's fairly, it doesn't feel like I'm that far away, especially for like a range loadout. So I would have to be almost 2 squares, a little bit beyond 2 squares. So once again, that distance is pretty close. Like say it's Machine Elite when it first came out, or even Hive Elite, you're not this close to the Terra and the ads and everything like that else. Eventually you can get there with gear and etc. But if you're trying to be ranged, like say Electric or Quantum or Munitions, anything like that, you're not this close to the ads. And this is where you would have to be to get the Galling Eruption damage. So you need the PI, you need the dot damage, so you really can't risk it in a range rotation. In single target maybe, but range I don't like doing it. Plus the rotation that I have lines up okay with Plasma Wretch. So the only annoying thing with Plasma Wretch is, if we go back to it here, Plasma Wretch before stats revamp used to be vulnerable interrupt. It was a jump cancelable power. So they changed that so you can't, it's not vulnerable interrupt, but then they didn't take that property away from it. So what I mean by that is, say if I use Frenetic Bombardment, or sorry, Plasma Wretch, you can't clip it. So if I just wait for the cooldown, I'm going to try to clip it, trick it with my trinket. Nothing. Does not work. So that's a little bit annoying, because then you could run something like a Bloodlust, clip a Plasma Wretch or Bloodlust, and then have a critical boost. But can't do that here, so you're kind of stuck. The only other change would be, obviously, if it's max range, use Neovenom boost. I have Berserk just because you can be close. Like say you're in a Berserk, you can get a little bit close, use your rotation, pop your super, and go, and then go back to max range when you don't have your super. So if you don't want to risk it in terms of basically dying or having the risk of dying, then yes, use Neovenom boost for full range. But like I said before, Berserk is just so good that you want to take that risk if you can. And Robot Psychic is just basically there for filler power. Its damage isn't great from range, but once again, it's just a filler power. And Frenetic Bombardment, I don't actually use this power in my rotation. It's only there because Freezing Breath and Dreadful Blast are both vulnerable interrupts. So say you're in a situation where you get stunned out or interrupted, just use Bombardment until one of these powers are off cooldown, and then go back into your regular rotation. So I'm not going to use this power. It's only there just in case I get interrupted, and instead of doing no damage, at least I can use this damage and get something. So that's the only reason why I use that here, is just in case something happens and I need to use a power just to start DPSing again. But that's essentially going to be the loadout here. Wretch, Dreadful Blast, Freezing Breath, Bombardment, Robot Psychic, and Berserk. Okay, and I'm going to be out of power there. So you can basically get the sense of the rotation. So basically it's Plasma Wretch, Dreadful ×3, clipping that with Freezing Breath, and then as soon as the cooldown for Dreadful comes back up, that's when you clip off Freezing Breath. So you don't want to hold, because you can basically keep holding Freezing Breath the entire time. Don't do that, because that's going to, it's just going to be ending up be less damage, as well as it's going to mess up your rotation for everything else. So this Wretch, Dreadful ×3, clip that with Freezing Breath, and then as soon as Dreadful comes up, range tap and clip that out of it. Go into Plasma Wretch, Dreadful ×3, Freezing Breath, and then clip off it. As you can see, everything is coming up just in terms of the cooldown. And you continue on. And then, like I said before, if you get interrupted in any of those powers, like say you get interrupted in Dreadful and have to stop, then just tap off. Then you can just tap off, Bombardment until one of those come back up, and then just continue on. So basically, Frenetic Bombardment is only there as a filler power, just in case you get interrupted on Dreadful or Freezing Breath to screw up rotations. But as you can see, that range damage is by no means bad. The first K pressure was 29k, 35, 33, 30, 37. 37k from range as rage. So by no means is that bad damage at all from rage. 37k, 33k, 35k is very respectable for range DPS, and that's max range. Plasma Rush, as you can see, max range. Dreadful, is max range. And Freezing Breath, same thing. Max range. So that that's a max range rotation. The only thing is that you're technically using two powers that are vulnerable to interrupt in Dreadful and Freezing Breath. That's the only downside of the rotation, but very, very respectable numbers from a range power set that's not known for it. So basically, for a single target for range, you've got basically two options. One, if you can melee the boss, then you'd use this or loadout. And then if you can't melee the boss, which is most of the time, especially in Elite, use a different rotation, which I'll show you in this moment. But essentially, the go-to melee loadout for a single target, Relentless Anger. You could technically use Galling Eruption too, depending on the situation. I use Relentless Anger just because I want to earn Berserk as fast as possible. So basically, Relentless Anger, Severe Punishment, Outrage, Revenge, and E-Chain. So basically, the first hit of Revenge is single target. Basically Revenge Spin is AoE. E-Chain, the first E-Chain is single target. The second E-Chain is AoE. And then obviously Severe is just the dot. So that's just quick and dirty there, just for melee, if you need to as well for a single target. So in terms of the actual single target rotation, if you can't melee rage single target, it's not terrible. It's not good. It's basically right in the middle. Basically, you need to be close enough to use Galling Eruption. I know I just finished saying that in my range loadout that Galling Eruption is fairly close, but just with this rotation, you just need to use. You could technically use Plasma Wretch, but it hurts the rotation so much in terms of timing that it just becomes an issue. Because Galling Eruption's PI lasts for 12 seconds and the dot lasts for 12 seconds, where Plasma Wretch, the PI lasts for 12 seconds, but the actual dots only last for 6. So Galling Eruption, Amplified Heat Vision, E-Chain, Dreadful Blast, Robot Sidekick, and Berserk. Obviously, if you're close enough to use Galling Eruption, you can use Berserk, and that's just good for kind of... Berserk helps level out the difference in single target. So if your single target's subpar, but you can keep using a Berserk Supercharge consistently, then it's going to even out your poor single target DPS compared to other Supercharges for DPS, which usually aren't that great on single target. Most Supercharges in the game aren't too great for single target. They're meant for ads. But using Berserk, it's going to be just as good on AoE as in single target. So obviously, as towards you get the end, come on, Robo Psychic. As obviously before, when you start, Spartan Target starts to get low, you're going to have the damage from E-Chain hitting a bit harder. The same thing you're going to have consistently in the fight there as well. But as you can see, even in the beginning, I still had 25k. That was without, obviously, the Spartan Target at full health. And then you can certainly have the lower parsers too, 16k. Just when nothing crits, nothing with heat vision. E-Chain can still crit. Obviously nothing with Dreadful. But then you get back up to consistent like 19, 18, 23k there at the end with E-Chain. So once again, it's not terrible single target, not great single target, basically right in the middle of the road. So if I was buffed, those would all be straight 20ks. If I had Berserks mixed in, that'd be 25, 28, 30k parsers. So basically, Berserk kind of evens out the single target damage, but once again, single target damage or rage, it's not terrible, it's not great, but 25, 19k, 23k is still very respectable for it. So in terms of the melee single target, I'm just starting on a Spartan target that has full health, so you can kind of get that idea as well. So once again, obviously you're going to be low on power. That's even with Robot Psychic. But as you can see then, 21, 19, 20, it's about the same. It's not like melee is going to be better than range single target. It's just that melee, you'll be able to use, obviously, Berserk consistently. You can use Relentless Anger, so you can start building your Supercharged more often, as well as if there's any adds that are close to the boss, stuff like that. Obviously, the second hold of E-Chain and the second hold of Revenge are going to be AoE, as well as Relentless Anger. So once again, it's not like any night and day difference to use the single target melee rotation. It's still consistently in the 20s basically. But the melee rotation has a bit more potential to be higher damage, especially without rage, especially with the E-Chain Revenge crits. When E-Chain starts to get lower, because you're using both holds of E-Chain, or the other single target rotation, you're just using the first E-Chain. So more potential with this one, but obviously a bit more risk there as well. But you're still getting consistent results. Okay, so now we're on to the rage tanking side. There hasn't really been a time where rage tanks weren't good. In the past, rage tanks are basically the ad tank. And even nowadays, they're still the ad tank. But previously, what rage worked as the more ads or more targets around, you used to be able to cheese it. And you could even summon like pets and base items and stuff, and anything, any kind of item counted towards you would buff your health as rage. So the concept of rage was always the more ads around you, the higher you can buff your health, because rage defense was always subpar. It basically focused on its self-healing and its base health, and just keep buffing it. So the more you're buffing your health, the more targets, more ads, the easier you have to survive. So basically, if you had a whole bunch of ads, you wanted a rage tank. But on boss on boss fights, rage tanks suffered just because they couldn't get their health high enough, their base health, because there wasn't enough targets. There's only 1 or 2 targets, so you couldn't buff it. That's why you didn't see rage tanks in survival mode, because after round like 11 or 12, they were pretty bad because they just couldn't get their base health high enough. That's why you went ice for the defense and fire for the base health. But even to nowadays, rage is still the ad tank. Rage was really successful in Hive and in Machine, in Crown of Thorns and Throne. It's just rage tank has always done well and been one of the best tanks to be, one of the best tanks, but one of the easiest tanks to do well with. So we'll kind of go into the stats revent changes here. So if we scroll up to tank roll, so now we get 20% health, base, 50% defense while not blocking, 3% perception, don't worry about that. You get scar tissue. So scar tissue is as your combat meter increases, gain health equal to a percentage of your dominance up to a maximum of 100% of your dominance. So basically what your combo meter is your hit counter. So I'll show that when we're on the sparring target. So the higher you get your hit counter maxed out at 50 is when, so different tiers. So say you have a 20 hit counter, 30 hit counter, 40 hit counter. Once you've reached a 50, then you're basically your scar tissue is the highest that it can go. And then now your only enraged mechanic is severe punishment. It used to be relentless anger as well. So in terms of the actual spec for it, we can go into that first. So in terms of specking for it, you want to do hybrid just because you're going to be using your weapon combo somewhat to regen. Not that rage tanks use that much power either, unless you're really spamming like Ragebringer and stuff. I've never had an issue with power, even if I'm not doing weapon combos consistently. But you want this because you get the dominance resto. That's more important than being a super powered spec. If you find yourself really running low on power, you could take super powered. I've never needed it before as a tank. Usually with rage tank, you're popping severe. You're just waiting for E chain. You're not really spamming your abilities because you got to keep your shields on cooldown for when enraged is off. You may have like a breakout. But most of the time, you're just using Ragebringer, Without Mercy, and Severe Punishment, and E-Chain for a cancel. So there's not too many moments where you're just completely spamming power unless you're just spamming pulls or Without Mercy just for the healing. So I've never had an issue not being hybrid. With this one, the critical healing chances and magnitude, even though basically if we go back here to Severe Punishment... There we go. So the severe punishment, you gain 10% control resistance and become enraged, healing back a portion of damage taken for 8 seconds, after which you suffer from rage crash, causing all healed damage to be instantly returned. And then recover more health from enrage and gain fever or fervor for 15 seconds, increasing your defense by 50% while not blocking. So essentially what that means is you have a set amount of health that you're just going to recover. I believe it's at 85%. I could be mistaken. I'm pretty sure it's 85% of basically the damage you take will be healed back by severe punishment for the 8 seconds. So the thing is, obviously, it's 8 seconds, 12-second cooldowns. You get 4 seconds when you're vulnerable and don't have any healing back mechanic. That's why we're going to take some shields. But essentially, that's what you have to watch out for, is that you have a window where you're not going to have any healing back mechanics that you're more vulnerable for. So going back into the spec, that healing back from the rage mechanic, since it's actually based on a mechanic, it has nothing to do with actually healing. The critical healing innates, these don't apply for the rage back mechanic whatsoever. They also don't apply for Without Mercy, with Ragebringer, because those are based on mechanic heals. The only heals that the critical healing chances affect are Ire and your Soda. So it's not like Fire where you want to take some resto and you want to take the critical healing because you're healing yourself so much. Same thing with Atomic. Atomic and Rage are mechanic heals, so these do absolutely nothing. So you just want to take the 10 to get down to the tier, and then basically you want to max out health. Even though the mechanic is based on Dom, since everything is based around buffing your health, basically the more health you have, the more healing, the more hits you can survive, the more healing you can get. It is much more beneficial to be a full health spec in terms of Rage as opposed to a full Dom spec. Because you can get yourself a higher base health with max health than you would be able to with the Dom. So if you expect pure Dom, you'd have less survivability as you would full health, even though some of Rage mechanics are based on overall dominance. So basically maxing out health and then putting the rest you have into Dom. Acrobats, you just need Rocket Assisted Glide. I take the resistances, like I said before. They don't really scale at all, so you don't really need to, but I still take them. You can also technically take Perfect Poise. We'll get into that in a sec with the Gemini shields. But since I'm Acrobat, you could technically take Perfect Poise. Or in the iconic powers, you got Amazon Deflection, Mesmerizing Lasso, which is your Hard Taunt single pull. You've got Hard Light Shield and Pheromone Bloom. So these are basically the 4 iconic powers you're going to need to take. Pheromone Bloom is that 25% super that makes it easier for the overall the Gemini usage if you're going to use that. We'll get into that later in the discussion here. And then obviously Amazon Deflection, which is more of a boss type situation where you need an extra shield. Hard Light Shield is going to be one of your go-to shields. It's a little bit buggy at the moment. Hard Light Shield, if you cast Hard Light Shield and then have like a Blessing or a Boon of Souls, like a Healer Shield already existing on you, it won't stack with Hard Light Shield because Hard Light Shield Heartless Shield used to be based on the healing formula because it was technically considered a healing shield before stats revamp. So I believe that's interfering with how the coding works on it, where it's treated as a healer shield so that they just don't stack. So it says you already have a shield, so when you pop Heartless Shield, it just doesn't work. It's most commonly with Blessing, but I've also seen it with the other healer shields as well. So you just kind of watch the timing on that. So if you've got a shield on you from the healer, if you pop Heartless Shield, it's not going to stack, and you're going to lose that shield. So, but still, it's you need something you need to run because you need a couple shields. And Amazon Deflection isn't the best and always because you can, yes, it's very high in its damage absorption, but you can get countered out of it. So that goes into loadouts here. Now, essentially, with the loadouts, or I guess I should go back to it, actually in terms of stats. So with hybrid, just the critical healing 10s, max power or max health, and then 187 in a Dom. That puts me at 123,945 base health. It puts me at 11,254 base restoration and 16,500 base dominance. And in terms of gear, that's putting me at absorption adapter, which is always going to be what you run as a tank. Basically, activate shield, reducing damage by 75%, equal to 30% of your health. And obviously, since we're buffing health, that's nice. The head mod, whatever supercharge you're going to use as a tank, if you're going to use either Gemini, that's what you put in head mod. So perfect poise, dash attack, pheromone bloom, whatever. Neck mod's always going to be fortified assault. Back mod, you could run accelerated ire, but more often than not, I don't run ire. I just run the breakout trinket, so I run accelerated reducted rage. Chest mod's always going to be hardy. Leg mod, there's no leg mod that applies, and the healing's minimal on it anyway, so don't worry about it. Ring, trinket, foot mod's always going to be tumbling master. Max damage, same thing. Regenerative shielding, the healing on it is so minimal it's pointless. If you really want to run regenerative shielding, get the 500 health from it, then you'd be my guest, but it just doesn't scale out after stats revamp. In terms of your trinkets, you've got some choices again. So you're always going to want Chronomac emitters. Basically, that's the best tank consumable in the game in terms of CC ability. So with that one, pull them with Ragebringer, stun them with Chronos, pull them without Mercy, and then, Chrono them. You always want the Breakout Trinket, or basically, there's different variations. You don't need this specific Breakout Trinket, but you need a Breakout Trinket for PvE. The Health Trinket, that's going to be very handy as well. And this one is your option. You could run Psychic, or you could run one of the Tom bots for some health recovery. Like, it really doesn't matter. Your fourth is your option. You could run Psychic. You could run Supply Drop, Orbital, whatever you want. So, but really, you could also run the consumables. So personal dampening fields, undercurrent. That one is also an option as well. So if you want like an extra shield to kind of give you a little bit more flexibility, you could run both consumables, the health trinket and the breakout trinket. That's your option as well. It's just completely up to you, whichever your preference is. The trinkets don't matter as much. You should have Chronos. You do need a breakout trinket. The other two, optional. In terms of artifacts, same thing again. There's always going to be 2 artifacts, and then after that, you've got some choices. You're always going to run the Manacles of Force. That's always going to be your go-to one. 10% shield reduction, absorbing 50% incoming damage, and reapplies that as a dot. The second trinket, or second artifact, you're always going to want the Distal Refractor. That's very handy because they buffed it for tank. So hitting an enemy with a pull grants you and up to 7 group members health equal to, at 120 it's 15.5, and then 160 it's 17.25. And this effect is 15% more effective as tank, and then 30% more effective as tank. So having this at 160 is very beneficial. Plus you get health and Dom as the base stats on it. So this is a very handy tank for artifacts because you're always going to be using a pull. The third one, this is where you get some options. You could technically run the sparring AI. I'm not an overall fan of the sparring AI because I believe that the immunity that it grants you, the control effects for 3, 4, and 5 seconds, I don't believe that's very consistent at all. I've found that especially when I've had it in raids, because I used to have this at 120 and used it, and then just consumed it into one of my other artifacts in the past. But I really don't believe or put any kind of weight in those consistency of those control effects. Now, this is a great precision artifact, but for tanking, not so much. And it gives you health, dom, and prec, which is going to be the same as say the refractor anyway. So you're really not gaining any more base stats. Lazar Pit Water is a stupid artifact. Don't use this. It gives you health, might, and power. You don't even like. It's got terrible base stats. A 1 hour self rally. No, just don't. That's a stupid tank artifact. It's not even a tank artifact. Just don't use it. Now the only other options you have are Eye of the Gemini and the Tetrahedron, depending on your stats. So with me, because I'm buffing my health as much as I can, like I've got the highest like base health. I'm taking health sodas, megas, whatever. I'm trying to get my health as high as possible as Rage, so it makes sense to run the Tetrahedron because even though you're a tank, because hitting an enemy with a superpower grants you and up to 7 group members might equal to 1.8% of your health. Because when I'm fully buffed on the combo meter up to 50, all that health increase on the all natural sodas, everything else, I can give it about 5,500 to 6,000 might to the group with my stats. Like obviously it's going to be dependent on how many extra skill points you can put in, but you can have 5,000 to 6,000 health or 5,000 to 6,000 might to the entire group by running this. And as well as you can see, it's 5% health, 3% and 3% power. So you don't really, the might and power don't help, but it's a 5% health artifact where even the manacles is 5% health, the Distro Refractor is going to be 5%, and then the Tetrahedron is 5%. So you get a massive health buff by running the 3 artifacts at 160. The only other option you have is the Eye of the Gemini. Obviously, you know what that does. Restores 3% health and 2% supercharge every second when using Caster's Watch. Basically, that also gives you the Dom and Resto. It doesn't give any health. That's the thing. So it lowers your overall health, but you do get a little bit Resto and Dom because it's not technically a tank artifact. So you got some options. With Rage, personally, I don't like running a Supercharge because you don't really have a spot for it in your loadout. You certainly can, like if you want to mess around, but if you wanted like the go-to survival loadout for Rage, you don't have a Supercharge in it. Unless technically you could use Dash Attack just because it's a 1 second cooldown shield, but that's only for super speed. So I would use Pheromone Bloom. That's a 25%er, 12-second cooldown. You've got Perfect Poise. That's a shield, but that's 30 seconds. So if you really need a group that is your league raid or you're on a pug and they need supercharge, you can run Pheromone Bloom. Like it's okay healing. It's not a shield. I prefer a shield. So if you're super speed, always run Dash Attack. Perfect Poise is a little bit too long. But you've got that option if you want to run Eye of the Gemini. Specifically as Rage tank, I don't like it. Maybe other tanks, like certainly Atomic would fit for it. Fire would fit for it. Fire is going to be really good with Bloom. Ice, I'm not too sure of the weight. Same with Earth. I'm not too sure about Earth either. But Rage, you can technically run it for a shield, but don't feel like you need it and don't feel pressured to use it because I'd much rather have a better survivability loadout running Hard Light Shield or running Amazon Deflection as well. I just personally don't find that Rage does well using a super, unless it's Dash Attack, but that's a specific case because that's a 1 second shield cooldown. So that's unless you're super speed, but not all tanks are super speed. So if you're super speed, use Dash Attack. If you're flight or acrobatics or skimming, honestly, don't worry about it unless you have a preference. But myself personally, unless we're trying to spam Gemini purposefully, I will always run the Tetra, just because I'd rather have the health. I'd rather have once I get this to 160, I'm looking at a 15% health buff just from these 3 artifacts. That's huge, and it's just more beneficial for Rage, and more beneficial to the group because you got DPS. Even myself, like I don't recommend DPS run the Tetra anymore unless once again you really want to help the group. But as a tank, go for it. You get 5% health out of it. You get a little bit of power, and you give out 5,000-6,000 might to the group depending on your stats. So you're helping the group as well, being the tank. So you're giving them health with the refractor, and then you're giving them might with the Tetra. So it's just you're buffing them without even really realizing it. So that's my personal preference. Okay, so in terms of a rotation for Rage, or I guess I should say more a loadout than anything. So you're always going to have Ragebringer as your pull. You're always going to have Severe Punishment. That's your actual Rage mechanic. Without Mercy, that's going to be your main pull for ads. If say if it's a boss fight, obviously you don't need Without Mercy then. So you could run, Amazon Deflection or something else, or Ire if you need a breakout, or like a reducer. So you've got some options there. If it's a boss fight, you don't need Without Mercy. But if you're going to be dealing with ads, then yes, you need, or hallways, you're going to want Without Mercy. And if you don't have to deal with ads, you've got options. You've got Remorseless Recovery for a reducer and a little bit of health. You've got Ire for a breakout. You could take another reducer, say like Violence or something like that. So you have some options, or another shield, or Supercharge. You could run the Gemini then. But in terms of that, that one is depending on the situation. You're always going to take E-Chain. That's going to be your cancel. So it's either going to be the single pull or the hold, which is vulnerable to block, but in case you cancel a bit early, then you can hold just to extend it. And you're always going to have redirected rage, and you should always have hard light shield as well. Now, once again, you could technically sub out hard light shield for, say, Amazon Deflection or the Supercharged, depending on the situation. But hard light shield is going to be in like 80% of your loadouts. So in terms of, we'll get into a few things here. So for one, the actual rage mechanic. So using Sphere of Punishment, what I'll do is I'll stop talking so you can actually hear the mechanic here. Okay, so basically you heard the heartbeat. Once again, you don't always have to play with game sound, but the way you can see it, so if we do it again, you're going to see the heartbeat is going to start to pick up speed a bit. So now you're at 6 o'clock, 7, 8, and then you crashed. So basically that's where you want to basically cancel your rage crash in between that 7 to 8. Closer on the 7 side, so if I pop it here, or say like Without Mercy, you're taking damage, you're taking damage, you're taking damage, and then pop E-Chain, and then you've canceled it. So if you cancel a bit early, like say you do it at like 6 o'clock just because you're worried about it or broke out or kind of panicked a bit, E-Chain, and then the second hold. So the second hold, yes, you're vulnerable to block, but obviously being blocked or countered is a lot better than actually missing the rage crash. So if you cancel, say at 6 o'clock or a little bit after 6, you could do the second hold, or if you want to time it just for 7 o'clock, you can just hit just the single pull. And that's what you mostly saw me do in my previous video talking about kiting. I didn't usually, certainly in Crown of Thrones, if you use the second hold of E-Chain, you're just more likely to get trapped. So, but in terms of the counter meter, let's kind of show it here. So we're at 128,000. Yeah, we shouldn't have any pull active at all because I didn't proc the artifact. So we're at 123,945. So we'll just start to get our meter up here. So now we're at basically 21. So that's 139,191. This is why you kind of want to want hybrid as well, just so that you can kind of keep your combo meter up. Now we'll stop at 140. So that was a 40, so now we're at 146,814. So 146,000 health, and that was at a 40 meter, and now we'll get to the max here at just past 50. Okay, so now we're obviously past 50, so now it's going to be the highest, 149,355. So 149,000. And we started off at, what was that, 123, I believe? See if it goes back down here. Yeah, so we basically went from 123,945 all the way up to 149,000 just with the rage combo meter mechanic. So we gained, like 26,000 health just from that, from doing nothing else but keeping your combo meter up. So there's going to be situations where you can't keep your combo meter up, but that's obviously something you're ideally looking to do just because of that health that it's going to give you. Okay, so as you saw with the Supercharged, what I did was I took a baseline for how much damage that rotation would be without Berserk, which was the 381,000, like basically 381,659 and 378,041. That was technically like the baseline, because it's hard to test Berserk to show how much damage it is because it's based on your rotation. And I was using Gala here just to parse a little bit higher. So technically the damage you can get, that was the rotation there. The exact same thing with Berserk. That wasn't recorded because I forgot to hit record, but technically that's 1.19 million. You just saw 1.34 million. So that's the damage potential with Berserk. So basically the baseline's about a 38k parser, 381k, and then here you've got a million, 1.3 million parser, 134k parser, just with one Berserk Supercharge. So that goes to show you how important it is to earn Berserk consistently. Now the Berserk Mangle one, do I still have that up on this one? I think that showed different. Was that this one? Yeah, Berserk and Mangle, same thing. It's unrealistic, but I guess if you're in a huge group spamming Eye of the Gemini the entire time and you're getting Supercharged regen, I guess it's possible you could drop Robot Psychic and run Berserk and Mangle, but it's just it's not as practical. But as you can see, the benefits are right there in the face. So that's Rage and their Supercharges. So you may have asked yourself, Obsidian, why aren't you using Violence? Violence is the mobile PI, so basically anywhere you have the aura on yourself will inflict Plasma Burn. So if you're moving between ads, because that's the reason why I tell you not to use Galling Eruption, because it inflicts Plasma Burn. It's a hard to hitting dot, but it's a 12-second cooldown. So if you're moving in hallways and ads, you can't realistically keep summoning that. So then you have no PI for Eviscerating Chain and Outrage, or even Lacerate as well. So you need Relentless Anger, 6-second cooldown, inflicts Plasma Burn, but you may be thinking, oh, there's Violence as well, so it's a mobile dot. The Violence is bugged right now. So say I use Violence, you see the PIs on these, boom, now they disappeared. So if I walk over here, walk back, now they just got applied again. So essentially when you use Violence, the PI will disappear from those targets after 3 seconds and will not reapply. So if I use Violence, the PI is there, 2, 3, and gone. So as you can see, the dot is still ticking, but the PI is not active. Even though the PI should be there for 12 seconds, it'll drop on any target that's in your range. So I use Violence again, wait till it drops. It dropped. Now I run back. See, there you go. It reapplied it. And then dropped, reapplied it. So it's the same thing if you're on like a big pile of ads. This is where it becomes the issue. If you're in a big pile of ads, summon Violence, and boom, now all those ads just lost their PI. Now you've got to like separate yourself from the ads and run back. just to reapply the PI, which you won't be able to do. That'll be huge damage loss because obviously you're going to be right in the middle of VADS with Outrage and Lacerate. So it's not like you can just run away for a little bit, come back, and reapply the PI just to continue your DPSing. So until they fix this violence PI, do not use violence. You cannot afford to have, because the whole point of violence was that you have mobile PI, so that whenever you go and run to the next set of ads, you have a PI still there. But if your PI is going to drop prematurely, especially after 3 seconds, then it's absolutely useless to use. So do not use violence. It is bugged right now. That's why if you see anyone using it, just tell them not to. They're losing damage overall because of it.
Going harder than being black in America. If you love the money, your revenue is irrelevant. Working on myself while you busy being replicas. School of crackheads, I blow minds through experiments since I was 15. Music in the dream, in the spotlight, while behind the scenes. I wanna shoot a movie and show them what I see. Direct it how I want it and run it how I please. Like dirty Sprite up in these early nights, became the hottest type of spitting cause it burned the stripes. Ever since I started rapping, had them terrified. I ain't got a tweet about it, music proves I'm certified.
I've been stacking lunch money since day, you know. Telling all my niggas it'll get better. Victoria, scoop the candle like the name.
Oh, sweet revenge, you feel so close, and in my heart, I've always known you'd fuck me right, but fuck me over, leave me scarred, so best prepare your shield and armor, your shield and armor. Oh, deep in drinks, lost in my own thoughts, I'm drifting off. Must have forgotten that one night in late October marked the time I laid down my shield and armor, my shield and armor. You left me hanging, you shook me now, I'm shaking you. Feel me like deja, deja vu. You left me hanging, you shook me now, I'm shaking you. Feel me like deja, deja vu. Tell me how it feels now when the lights dim. Tell me, do you want me now? Tell me, do you want me now? Tell me how it feels now when the lights dim. Lights dim. Feels now when the lights dim. Feels now when the lights dim down. You want me closer, dreaming of the days you said we were amazing. Now you lost me, craving you. I'm thinking about kisses, leave me thinking about you. You left me hanging, you shook me now, I'm shaking you. Feel me like deja, deja vu. You left me hanging, you shook me now, I'm shaking you. Feel me like deja, deja vu. You tell me how it feels. You left me hanging, you shook me now, I'm shaking you. Feel me like deja, deja vu. You tell me how it feels. You left me hanging, you shook me now, I'm shaking you. Feel me like deja, deja vu.
The pain and pleasure, you feel what you seek. The difference between us is that the more that you give secrets of who you know you don't want to be. But what's the use if you won't even show me? At least every word that's slipping out of my mouth, and how my emotions are out of heaven and hell. Don't be afraid of what you do. Can heal the parts of you that you fear to kill. Time is running for the race. I'm out of place. Please don't run away from me. Away from me. Black holes fill this empty space. Swallow and take one more sip. I'm not okay. These voices scream. I'm empty, I'm numb, I'm running, 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 running. Empty, I'm gone so long, I long for anyone. I'm empty, I'm numb, I'm running, 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 running. Empty, I'm gone so long, I long for anyone. This is all in the dark. You love you in the dark. Settle pretendings where you just lay with me. Please touch every beautiful of a broken part, and at least the guilt I hide from you won't shadow the grief of words I used to cry myself to sleep. I want to be lonely, it's not the same at all. Don't wanna be lonely, but long deeply alone. The fear, it haunts me, never finding someone like me. Misunderstood, I lost connection. Time is running for the race. I'm out of place, please don't run away from me. Away from me. Black holes fill this empty space. Swallow and take one more sip, I'm not okay. These voices scream. I'm empty, I'm numb, I'm running, running, running on. Empty, I'm gone so long, I long for anyone. I'm empty, I'm numb, I'm running, running, running on. Empty, I'm gone so long, I long for anyone. I swear it's cold and clean across my face. Eyes wide open to his yellow gaze, creeping in to my garden's gates. Flowers only bloom on rainy days. All the days short, no words to say. Just one kiss to live the life. Playing God with a pocket knife. It only took 2 slits to get I'm so figure eight, hating and making it the same day. So insane, so insane. Don't you tell me how you can't stop thinking about what we were. Like we had that special luxury us. That ain't us, that ain't us. Go on and get your act together, saying we could be forever. Why you acting like a child? You shouldn't end up. So tell your friends I'm being selfish, I'm just trying to get happy. Why you acting like a child? You shouldn't end up. No more dealing with all your emergencies. Guess I ran all out of empathy. I'm doing me, I'm choosing me. We were a lesson I had to learn. Now I'm making changes and you first. The bridges burn, there's no return. Go on and get your act together, saying we could be forever. Why you acting like a child? You shouldn't end up. So tell your friends I'm being selfish, I'm just trying to get happy. Why you acting like a child? You shouldn't end up. Saying we could be forever. Why you acting like a child? You shouldn't up. So tell your friends I'm being selfish, I'm just trying to get happy. Why you acting like a child? You shouldn't up.